Hey there, it's a Crazy Spider here to talk to you about something that's been on my mind and been in the news a lot lately. Do video games cause violence? There's been a lot of debate over whether or not video games do cause violence. Now I'm going to do my best to give you the information you need to make your own informed decision, although I do already have an opinion myself. There's a large number of people who have been saying that the reason for a lot of the more recent murderous acts is actually due to people playing video games and being more violent and accepting social violence. Now this has raised a lot of social flags as to how we do have violence in our society, and one of the things people like to point out is video games. Now violent video games have existed on every platform ever. Everything from PC, PlayStation, Xbox, Wii. There are violent games out there. That's not something we can avoid. The question is whether or not do these games cause people to be violent or aggressive. One of the big points against video games is saying that video games cause people to become desensitized to violence. People can become desensitized to violence. It is a thing. Some people who have been in very violent situations can either be desensitized to it or come back with post-traumatic stress. This is both a problem that could exist and potentially transfer over into video games. There are no studies that prove that people can become desensitized to violence through playing violent video games, but the thought or idea is out there, and it very well could be true. A very common counterpoint to this in the gaming community is saying that people should be able to distinguish between a game and reality. It's very different. It's the same way as someone should be able to distinguish between a movie and reality, or a book and reality. A game is just another form of media that people take in, one way or the other. A common argument from the video game side is people saying violent video games are nothing more than an average video game wrapped in with fancy graphics that are intended to evoke an emotion out of someone, in the same way art does. To say that video games can't pull at your heartstrings, it would be silly and untrue. There are games out there that really do, that really grip at you. A couple good examples would be Heavy Rain and Spec Ops: The Line, both of which have very violent themes to them, but they evoke an emotion, a bit of desperation and horror. Whether or not you accept this as true or not, and that video games are in fact an art form, is up to you yourself. The counterpoint to this is saying violent art shouldn't be allowed either. There's no reason to have an absurd amount of violence, even in an art form, because it's desensitizing and wrong or gruesome. And that is just a personal opinion entirely. If you believe we should remove violent media from the world, then you have a very good argument there, but some people say it's freedom of speech and freedom of expression and it is important to be there. Now this is not directly related to the video game violence argument, but is something I deem very reasonable because of how people learn from other people. There's an experiment done in 1961 by an Albert Bandura, often called the Bobo doll experiment. In this experiment, children watched a video of either someone interacting with the Bobo doll in a violent way or a non-violent way, and then were put into a room to interact with the doll themselves. Children that saw the adult interacting in a violent way with the Bobo doll interacted violently with it themselves. Children that saw the video of the non-violent interaction didn't interact violently with the Bobo doll at all. Now there's a little bit more to this experiment and a couple more variations on it as well, but the general feel still states. People watch what other people do and interact based around it. When someone plays a game, if they are unable to separate reality from fantasy, that's their own problem and their own issue, and can cause violence. Although a healthy individual who is mature enough to understand the difference between fantasy and reality will be able to tell the difference and will not commit violent acts. Just because a video game is violent does not mean you are going to act violent. The way you have been taught and the way you learn is what's going to determine how you act and how you react to a violent game. One last point that I have to bring up that is true. Competition breeds aggression. This is true in any sport. Video games, football, soccer, baseball, hockey. Many sports that we think of nowadays as being very truly fun and great sports are violent in nature because we've made them that way. Even board games such as chess, when you put them in a different light, are very violent. You think about chess, you have two opposing armies that are fighting, killing each other, attempting to capture or kill the other team's leader. Now, you wrap that into a fancy skin, give it some pretty graphics, and make it violent, people would complain about it. Violent games have been around way longer than video games have. To say that humans have not been violent and have not created violent games up until video games would be wrong and just misused. Violent games have been a thing that have existed with us for centuries, and will be there for many years for us into the future. Violence is a persistent issue that has existed even before video games. It's unfair to blame video games for this violence. We really need to hit at the source and start talking about what's going on in our society and why we praise violence and what we can do to stop it. In the end, the decision is up to you. Do you think violent video games are a problem? Do you not? please tell me in the comments. I'd love to respond to any questions you guys have, but in the end, this has been a Crazy Spider. Hope you enjoyed this video. Good night.